Awesome. Please go right on ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Welcome everyone. I'm Robert. I'm a member of the RiskDAO, and yeah, I'd like to walk you through about some of the work we are doing at the RiskDAO with respect to data analytics and risk evaluation, of course. Yeah, Colton introduced the RiskDAO yesterday already, so let me focus a bit more around what we are doing and why. Yeah, next slide, please. So borrowing and lending was one of the first use cases in DeFi, and is amongst the biggest with respect to total locked value, which makes it also attractive for exploiters to look for opportunities, of course. And yeah, there are, of course, plenty of examples where, despite the technical audits, exploiters found ways to take advantage of flawed designs. But yeah, there's also additional pieces that go beyond just the smart contract exploits. I mean, some examples listed here, right? Iron Bank is actually an example of the more classical smart contract exploit. Itchy allowed just way too high of a loan to go out, not acknowledging that when loans get liquidated, there needs to be liquidity to sell into as well, and they didn't have that, and that made it crash basically. Venus was another issue where the price feed wasn't set properly. I mean, in the realm of the Luna collapse, there were even some platforms, I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but they hard-coded the UST price to 1, and then obviously people borrowed against that, enjoying that the real price was way lower back then. And yeah, it's like once you dig into these holes, you see plenty of these risks that are not that public, actually. So the RiskDAO is here to provide tools and resources to make protocols safer, and also risks more clear to especially the end users. So yeah, next slide, please. So feel free to look into the resources link to get a deeper read of what that entails. I want to focus this presentation on some work we've been doing and what sources and approaches we leverage, as I think that might be most useful for this track in the codeless conduct. So yeah, let's maybe dive into the first example. Next slide, please. Yeah, the Vesta Finance Risk Report. So not sure if everybody knows Vesta Finance, but Vesta Finance is a zero-interest lending platform on Arbitrum. So really, you get a loan and you don't pay any interest. What you do is you borrow VST. This is a USD-pegged stablecoin, and the collateral they accept is, Ethereum, REN BTC, TriCrypto, Ohm, Dopex, or GMX tokens. And the technology basically they're leveraging, this is stability pools. The whole protocol is a fork of the Liquidity protocol that introduced this mechanism. Maybe to explain quickly what a stability pool is. So think about this. In a lending borrow protocol, somebody needs to. You typically have liquidators that jump in and say, "Oh, this loan, comes basically the loaned amount." It comes close to the collateral value, so we need to liquidate it, and then the liquidators jump in. But what if you already have a pool at hand where you can say, oh, there's already money there and it will automatically buy it? And that's the stability pool, right? It's kind of like an instant buy wall, basically, for loans that need to be liquidated. And the way it works is like anyone can put money in the stability pool, typically stable coins. And so when a loan needs to be liquidated, the protocol would use these funds, the collateral's Ethereum, to basically sell that and use the funds from the stability pool. So then at the end, you as a stability pool maker, after liquidation, you will have ETH instead of your stable coins. And then it's up to you if you want to keep the ETH or if you swap it back to the stable coins. So yeah, now to the what we did for our risk report. It covered basically 3 parts. I also linked the full report if you want to go over that in more detail. The first part that often gets jumped ahead and not acknowledged enough was actually beyond just the pure report. Kind of like educate on the mechanics and behaviors, especially when you use something like the stability pool, because we ourselves needed to model it, so that also helped us to better understand how people use the stability pool, how quickly, for example, they will, when liquidations happen, as I explained, basically stable coin funds from the stability pool will be removed, and the users have like the collateral. So if they don't swap back, your funds are basically, your balances of the stability pool is lower. And you can envision if there's more and more liquidations, when your stability pool will drain, and you need to wait until people put back stable coins to fill up these, to replenish basically your fund. And how fast they do it, and when they do it, under which market conditions, these are things that, we also needed to educate the Vesta folks, because they didn't look too much into it. They were very much on the development side to just walk the existing Liquidity protocol and just like build out further collateral and for more functions around it. Now to the real report parts. Basically, there's the qualitative part and the quantitative part. With any risk, right, there's some potential issues that are hard to quantify. I will go over that on the next slides. And then obviously this is the stuff that people maybe are familiar with here. Like, the quantitative part is obviously analyze the risks under stressed market conditions, crashes, volatility, for the various protocol parameters, like, okay, how high can you allow kind of like loans compared to the collateral value? Like, when will you liquidate? How much debt can you actually hand out and stuff like that? So next slide, please. On the qualitative assessment, we looked at three major risks that I feel quite hard to quantify, like, put a number at it. The one typically, as also mentioned in the introduction, is like price oracle, because you have ETH as a collateral and you have, the loan in a stable coin. So obviously you need a price feed to know, what's the current price of ETH. And that's obviously a vector of issue or attack, because, who provides that price feed? Chainlink is quite common. It's like a well battle-tested resource. But then there's also the kind of like Uniswap, TWAP, the time-weighted average price feeds. Where also like, UniV2 is like the plain average versus UniV3 has like the geometric average, and then there's some nuances and difference around that. But there's more like, are there sanity backup checks for the price deviations? I even linked the dashboard where you can actually see that this happened more even for some Oracle like Chainlink and other stuff. So we would go through all of these different collaterals that we have and see which price, oracles they use and how good they work. Second major aspect is the liquidity. Think about this is also something, especially when you think about layer 2 solutions, as Vesta runs on Arbitrum. When you want to liquidate, you need to kind of like sell it into liquidity available on that chain. And if liquidity is thin and you use DeFi liquidity, you have slippage with these AMMs. And obviously, if the slippage is higher than the liquidation reward, a rational liquidator wouldn't liquidate, right? And so you would suffer a loss if it doesn't get liquidated. The last bucket is more like a various thing, assets like REN BTC. You have custodian risk, right? It's not fully decentralized. Then you need to think about underlying assets and algorithms, of the source like TriCrypto. You're basically relying on that curve. The curve algorithm works as it should be. Then, for something like DopeX, GMX, there's sometimes governance risk of like, okay, who controls actually how to mint new token? Because again, you hand out loans against collateral. So you better know if this collateral all of a sudden gets highly inflated because some admin starts printing more money. And how does the output look like? Next slide, please. You have some, very aggregated rating across those three buckets, basically. And then obviously in the report, it's a little small here, but you can again read it in the report with more detailed explanations how we actually derived that rating. So next slide, please. So now onto the quantitative part. We essentially wanted to showcase how the platform, with given parameter settings, performs under stressed simulated market conditions, right? So the first thing we need is kind of like a time series that would give us, price movements of the collateral, but then also, simulated liquidation events. And this is something where, there are various approaches out there in the market. The one, I guess, very popular is what Gauntlet is doing with agent-based simulations and try to model different behaviors, which is obviously good if you have some, big and liquid asset like Ethereum. But when you go into tail assets, as we have with Dopex, GMX, this won't really work. So what we did is we actually started with a very rich time series from Binance. They have ETH USDC liquidations on their perpetual markets, and then we just transferred that behavior basically to other assets, like Dopex and GMX, for example. And the way we did it, again, is explained in detail in the report, so I won't go too much into it. But we basically scaled it based on past correlations of the time series of ETH and these tail assets. And obviously, there's more additional data points that we need to look at, kind of like the slippage of the current pools. Here we basically just went for the available Uniswap pools, UniV2 pools, and also SushiSwap pools, because then you can just calculate the slippage, because it's kind of like, you just need the current liquidity, and this already gives you a slippage for any transaction size. So we could model that back in. To get these data points, right, you have the tools to get on-chain data, Dune, Covalent, depends a little bit on the layer or chain you want to get the information from. And then after all, with that data, we created different scenarios based on the different parameter assumptions that we have. All in all, we did everything in Python, 70K simulations, like a lot, where the parameters we played with is like, okay, after liquidation events, obviously that should have some additional price impact to the, original time series that we took. Then obviously you want to play around like, okay, how much depth do you allow to be handed out? How large is your initial stability pool, right? And how do you think, like, how quickly will it recover? We actually were quite positive to say, like, it will recover. Like, as I mentioned when I explained the stability pool, people will, need to kind of like, when liquidations happen, the stable coins is put out of the stability pool, so the stakers need to put that back in, kind of like selling the collateral. It's something you actually see happening, so it's not too optimistic, this assumption. But obviously it takes a little bit of time that all of the users do this. And then, there's other mechanisms that we need to model as well. It's also something, I'll link it at the end of the presentation. The whole thing is also open source, so if you're really into more the coding side here, you can look into that as well. But actually, that's not the main part of this presentation. Maybe let's look at how this looked like, because it might be more interesting. Next slide, please. So there's like one piece, like just the time series of the simulated price paths, which is the green part, and then you look at the stability pool, volume, which is the orange part, and then you see liquidations, which is like these orange spikes and a lot of this stuff. This was like mainly for us actually to see, is the model working as it should be. I mean, for the very sophisticated user, it helps to understand what the model is doing and how it's modeling these stress events and how that can look like in real life if these scenarios get real. But obviously, when you do something like this and work with on reports, you cannot assume that everybody is like a math geek or loves analytics and these complicated charts. You need to condensate the so what basically in a more concise manner, even though, right, this matrix in the bottom is still not something you would get directly, but you can already see, right, it's just two parameters, the depth ceiling and on the x-axis, and kind of like how stressed the market is on the y-axis, where you can see obviously the upper right corner, red signals, okay, this is not good, green is this is good. And that would immediately, even if you don't know anything about this whole thing, you would immediately grasp like, okay, if I choose a debt ceiling more to the left of the chart, I'm probably fine. So that's just like a general advice, of course, as well. Like, you know, when you work on something like this, that you have in mind the different, audience that might read your work. Next slide, please. Because then there's a second example that I can briefly touch upon. This is the bad debt dashboard, again, also linked. Maybe just what is bad debt? Bad debt is kind of like when the user debt is higher as a user collateral, which typically would say, well, then it should be, liquidated. But as you can see in the bad debt dashboard, there are cases when this never happened, right? And there's various reasons. One example is really when there's no, when the slippage to or the cost to liquidate this loan is higher than what you would get, nobody would do it, and this happens actually a lot, as you can see in the debt dashboard. Because once a user defaulted, you can't just like force him to repay, right? You don't know, like in TradFi, you don't know where he's living. You can't send some folks there to collect your debt. All you have is the wallet. So we have this dashboard. It periodically scans the platforms, updates these values. We use the nice APIs from Crystal and Zephyr for the price feeds. Again, if you're really into the code, this repo to do this dashboard is also open source. So if this is something which gives you inspiration to work on, feel free to also just look into the repo to get more details on that. So yeah, next slide, please. After me showing what and how we did it, here's, I guess, what you can use to start digging into the rabbit hole yourself. I guess the two major points is first, what really helps if lending, borrowing, and risk is something that is appealing to you. It's so much information out there to understand and also stay up to date what others learned and are doing. A bunch of good newsletters and assessments that are linked here. What also is super helpful is like governance discussions, articles, and white papers, because they typically go over kind of like existing solutions and what's good, what's not working, and all the pitfalls. So you don't need to think all through these yourself. You can just like read through and get it from there. And yeah, especially on the stay up to date piece, there's obviously Twitter where people would constantly bombard you with updates and ideas. Now on the more building part of things, there's also a lot you can just like build upon. Dune Analytics and Flipside Crypto is quite easy for the SQL folks out there, right? You have queries, dashboards that you can just like fork and extend. Covalent has nice showcases from the Alchemist, where you can also, it's in their Discord. You can go there, but they also have a good, documentation around the API. Then even if you go into, various like lending or leverage protocols, their discourse are also often quite good in their discussions. If you look for the risk mass data section, Gearbox comes to mind, has a very neat part there. And yeah, if you really want to go a level higher, there's various aggregators, Nansen, Token Terminal, that provide actually good aggregated data already. And yeah, if even some simulations, be it lighter or heavier, is something you're up to, there's also open source stuff you can just start upon. Token Spice, FatPad, probably heard about those. RiskDAO simulation environment is also open source. So yeah, maybe next slide, because that would be basically it from my little monologue here to rush through the things. Maybe. If, of course, there's also two more slides. One is like, if you have more questions, feel free to ping me in Discord. And also, this is the last slide. You don't need to go there now, but there's also links in case you're interested in joining the RiskDAO. For sure, just reach out there as well. I'm pretty sure we'll share that presentation in the general channel afterwards. But yeah, are there any questions right now? We and discuss those now, because I think we still have some time left. Yeah. Sure.
Wow. Thank you so much, Robert. That was a lot. Does anyone have any comments, feedback, anything, any questions?
Yeah, I think we just had a question. I think Isharif, you just had one, right? Was you?
I have a background in computer science, basically. I was also really interested in economics earlier in high school, so I took economics in high school. I took some introductory economics in university, but nothing proper. I also took some data science, but I don't feel competent enough to like everything that you were talking about. I have an surface level understanding of it, but I don't feel competent enough to actually go and look up, like actually, do the digging myself. What would you say, like, is it feasible for someone to pick up this stuff and learn it on their own, and then be actually competent enough to go to the open source repositories you were talking about and look through the code for that for this stuff?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you have computer science background and even some data science knowledge, that's a big asset already. And the whole, all the part around the economics and stuff, like the kind of like the depths of like mechanics and how they should be. I think it might be even an advantage to not be too deep. I mean, I also had economics and finance in my studies, and have been quite deep in the TradFi world because before I joined crypto. And you are actually always biased when you think about how things should work. I mean, you have so much more opportunities in the crypto space, where it might help to be like unbiased and just see like, okay, this is how Aave does it, this is how Compound does it. How can we do it better without being biased by like, oh, this is how typically classical credit markets do it, and you need credit scores, and how do you do it here and there. I mean, obviously it helps a little bit here and there also to have that knowledge, but I wouldn't say it's a disadvantage to not have it. And I would say the answer is for sure yes. That's for sure possible to catch up, because it's just like it's a new world. Like, it's old concepts but brought into this new world. And if you have like the technical understanding, that's even more helpful to see, like, to faster grasp what people are doing.
Thank you, Robert. That was very encouraging. Music to my ears, actually. But and two things that I'd quickly like to say. One is that since I've been looking into this for a while, I found this one resource, and since you talk to so many people about this, you might have heard of it. But there's this professor on YouTube called Campbell Harvey, and I found his channel in which he put up like a series of lectures, like series of 3 collections of videos, playlists on introducing DeFi primitives and DeFi and economics and finance to people who don't have that knowledge before. And I've been watching them for a while, and I wanted to mention them now because it just sort of pains me that there's such a good centralized store of such valuable information, and it has really less exposure. So I really wanted to mention that to you.
Sure. I mean, maybe even share the link in the chat, because I actually don't know him. But yeah, as I said, like, there's so much information out there. It's really typically it's more a time constraint to catch up or stay up to date with developments.
I understand.
Any more questions or comments?
Okay, if there are no questions, we would like to thank Robert from RiskDAO for this presentation. and the link to the presentation is in the chat. So I will be ending this recording so that we can get ready for the next talk by Justina from Deep Work Studio Product Design.
Cool.
You,
yeah, and thanks again for having me as well.
Thank
and
you
yeah, again, don't hesitate